Good evening, everyone. It is your girl, Marcie Thomas, and I am so excited to be with you again this evening or afternoon or morning, depending on when you're watching, for this very wonderful conversation. If this is your first time here, you're in for a very, very special treat. Now, if you saw in the beginning of the video, this show is all about talking about the things that help us to live well, to live our very best lives. And I just feel that for us as Black women and those who are allies, it's just so important that we consider all the different aspects of what it really means to live well. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into tonight as we talk about our bodies, our wonderful and beautiful bodies. So I am coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. So if you don't mind dropping in the comments where you're joining us from, that'll be just wonderful so we can see who all is with us. So my very special guest wrote this wonderful book. Let's see, it looks like I got some hair grease or something on there. But she wrote this wonderful book, It's Always Been Ours, Rewriting the Story of Black Women's Bodies. And I had the wonderful opportunity to sit in on a panel that she presented at the National Book Club Conference a few months ago, and I just knew that I had to bring her on. So our special guest is Jessica Wilson, who is a dietitian, storyteller, and community organizer whose experiences navigating the dietetic and disorder fields as a Black queer woman have been featured on public radio shows and in print media, including the New York Times. She is the co-creator of Amplify Melanated Voices, a movement to center Black and Brown people in conversations about social justice, and host of the Making It Awkward podcast. Jessica knows the grandeur of Black joy and invites everyone to celebrate it for the magnificence and resistance it is. So without any further delay, welcome to the room, Jessica Wilson. Welcome, Jessica.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, yes, it's indeed a pleasure. You know, as I said up front, I really did enjoy when you talked to us at the book conference a few months ago, and I just knew that I would have to have you on. And I already had the book even before the conference, just so you know. So it was wonderful to actually hear you talk about it. So, you know, just as a means of starting, just give us a little insight into how you even decided to go into the field, become a dietitian, because as many of us know, and some of us don't, there aren't really that many Black dietitians. You're in a very small minority. So tell us a little bit about what drew you to the field to begin with.
The short version or the long version, Marcie?
Whichever you prefer.
I'm sure people will find bits that are helpful along the way. So we'll go long version. I was born and was a very large child from birth. For those of us who were, older, we may remember like those growth charts as kids, that would go up and down and they would mark our little height and weight. And I was always like sailing at the top of those. To me as a child, that looked like winning. To doctors, that looked like a problem. She's growing, too much, too soon, all these things. And so from a very young age, like I was told to go, actually from 6, to go to a dietitian to basically put me on a diet as 6, talking to me about like the changes that I need to make. So like that to me now in my like early 40s, well, any adult, hopefully can understand that that is just like a horrible way to treat a
Mhm.
6-year-old, right? To start like making their body a problem at like age 4, which is really what ended up happening. And, actually I was writing this book that really had me look back on like how I got to be where I was. So like that is like the seeds of this percolating. And because I was, in that framing of like wanting and questioning, like really what does body politics look like. I went into dietetics field, and you mentioned there are basically 3% of dietitians who are Black. I had no one in my schooling. It wasn't until Amplify Melanated Voices in 2020 that I met another Black dietitian.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's something. And that's what makes your work so important, because it's good to have people that look like us in spaces, and
Yeah.
that can understand that what might work for the masses
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily work for us. And your book really dives into that.
It's a really good connection, and how, so many metrics are not met for Black people, Black women, including those growth charts, including BMI, like all of those are not validated against anyone who isn't, either white or, in the case of BMI, like middle-aged white men. It's, yeah, just not what it could be as far as medical care for Black folks.
Right, right. And it exists across the board. And for everyone, if this is your first time watching, you're free to ask questions in the comments. We will make sure that we get to them. This is definitely meant to be an interactive space, because I know there may be some things that come up for you as we're talking through it, as it did, for me in reading the book. Now, the title, It's Always Been Ours. I found that very compelling, even when I heard about the book, even I want to say I pre-ordered it well before it actually came out. So yeah, I'm one of those.
Thank
When I heard about
you.
it, I pre-ordered and made sure I got it as soon as it came out. But what stood out to me, it's always been ours. In so many ways, we are made to feel like our bodies aren't ours.
Exactly. Yeah. The book details, and, I will talk about the ways that our bodies have been, we've lost agency, centuries past and through, today, be it through medicine or, enslavement or the mammification, or even like into the present day. I think of like the Black women in society, like the Stacey Abrams, who are really meant to like give up everything for this country and really labor, for this country. So many Black women, are only valued for, labor and not really who we are. So yes, really, our body narratives, our joy really have always been ours. Let's, look at that a bit deeper.
Yeah, let's reclaim it. And it's so ironic that Stacey Abrams, you just mentioned her, and you talk about her a little bit in the book. Just this past Friday here in Atlanta, I went to a book event that was Rachel Maddow, and Stacey Abrams was interviewing her, right?
Really?
Really. And a couple of things. Number one, I sent a picture to a friend of mine, and the first thing she made a comment about was Stacey's weight. First of all, that she thought it had fluctuated a little bit. But then secondly, I took, the MARTA train, and while I was waiting for the train to go home, there was a white lady that was sitting next to me. And so she asked me, do you think Stacey should run again? And I'm like, good God. And I said, well, I think that Stacey should do whatever it is that's going to bring Stacey joy.
Exactly.
Give Stacey peace. That's what I think Stacey should do. Not feel like she has to save the world, as you so eloquently mentioned just a few moments ago. Let her go find her happiness and let her find her joy. If that involves, being in the public eye or running for office again, so be it. But let that not be a thing that we are asking her to do. Let it be a thing that she does because she wants to do it.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but as we get into the book, and you mentioned like the mammification, there are like 3 different things that people usually assign to Black women. One is like being mammified, which I'll let you talk about, the Jezebel and the Sapphire, and how many those stereotypes of who people think that we are in these bodies, how they can continue to play out even in, modern times.
Definitely. In pop culture, I mean, all of them are prevalent, but oftentimes it's the angry Black woman, the sapphire, the one, who is snapping.
Mhm.
Or if we're looking at um, like older TV shows, the Jeffersons, like it's, clear which characters in there are the ones that are, loud and opinionated is what it, is
Mhm.
supposed to, come across. And really, it's wild to me that people think that Black women in general would not have like some anger when we live in this country or other Western countries. And that's just normal, like
Mhm.
an expression of like the truth for us sometimes is going to be stern. It is not angry. It is true and it's clear. And, it's just not all going to be, live, love, laugh, or like flowers and candy when, we live under white supremacy and capitalism. So that's, the sapphire, the Jezebel is one that I often see people trying to shield, say, younger Black women or old or even older Black women from being perceived as hypersexualized, which is a lot of what, was the narrative of Black women, as hypersexualized, promiscuous, say. And a lot of times that plays out in like clothing and like dress choices that people get judged for, showing too much cleavage, whatever it is. So that gets some policing, and I see that in younger women, especially like today. And then the mammification, I think, again, you mentioned already, Stacey Abrams, the ones who are the caretakers still.
Mhm.
So we, had the Aunt Jemimas and the ones with the kerchief, historically in those depictions, we can still see in some figurines out there. Um, but today, I think of the mammification of a lot of Black women, even in the workplace, even in the, like 2020 of it all, when really, Black women were, asked and continue to be asked to hold the feelings of a lot of people, just
Mhm.
because we're thought to be natural nurturers because of those historical narratives.
Right. And in the book, you give, data, you give, personal experiences, you talk about experiences with clients, conversations with friends, all of that. And you do have it, you do it with a sense of humor and levity in certain places. So that's what makes it, just so interesting. But what one of your personal experiences that I was like, no, they didn't. When you're like somebody is basically expecting you to coddle somebody at the job, like that's a part
Mhm.
of your role. Like, wait a minute, you're not being coddling enough. You're not being supportive. You're making that person feel bad. It's like, is it
Mhm.
your role to take care of her emotional needs?
Exactly. I don't see that in my job description, right? There was nothing that I signed on to that when my client who is white passing, decides to tell me that they're a woman of color was the situation, it was expected of me to like take her out to lunch and like help her develop her like sense of racial identity and all of these things. And I was in trouble, for not doing that. And I was like, this is wild. I don't even understand how this takes place in a workplace.
That's a lot, and it's just one of the other things that I found was interesting is that talk a lot about eating disorders
Mhm.
and how even in your field, what is perceived as an eating disorder doesn't always look like what we think it's supposed to look like, how
Mhm.
that enters whiteness and how you have seen with your own clients and you just know that that's not always the case. Talk a little bit about that because we don't necessarily think of us all the time as having eating disorders.
Right. So, historically speaking, it was white women who were, decided to be the frail, like those in need of tending and, fragile. And those were the, people very, specific to women as well, who get, eating disorders. We need to just, care for them and tell them that it's okay to eat food. But Black women, juxtaposed, we're supposed to be like strong and sturdy. Like there's no way that they would, need any type of care historically. And then today, like those narratives, we don't, erase them. And then any, like documentary that we've seen or any, infographic about eating disorders, it's, always white women. And that shows up in many ways. One, just doctors not knowing how to, see even eating disorders in young Black girls, especially also Black women. But as we already mentioned, things like BMI and how Black folks just will have more muscle mass, more bone density, so just naturally have a higher BMI. So weight, can be a red flag for an eating disorder, but many of us are just not going to be, low weight or even thin, just naturally. So that's another way we get dismissed. But so many people just don't see themselves like as someone who would get an eating disorder because that's a white girl thing for sure. So there's, so much going on to create the narrative that Black women don't get eating disorders. And one thing I missed was that, if Black women do get eating disorders, it's assumed to be like an overeating or binge eating, right? Because that, a Black woman could never, restrict or like engage in, the behaviors that are supposed to only be for white women. It's got to be the opposite, like the overeating.
And that just feeds all into the narratives of who people think that we are, because a lot of us do exist in larger bodies. It's easy to say that, oh, it's because we just eat too much or we don't have any control or, all these sorts of things, which aren't necessarily true.
Yeah, the hedonism, the pleasure seeking that's associated with like historical Black women as well.
One of the things I really found was interesting that you mentioned there were a couple of clients, people that you worked with that did have a level of eating disorders, Black clients. And oftentimes it came because they were trying to fit into this white centric environment and felt like they had to look a certain way to do that.
There was one grad student that I was working with, and she was the only Black woman in her program. Lots of us can likely relate to that. The only Black woman in her program. And at the time, she was entering grad school, her doctor told her that she needed to lose some weight. And so she went on, this, I think, a wellness kick is what she had, called it to me. And as she was losing weight, to make her doctor happy, she was noticing her social capital increase, her colleagues, her, professors or coworkers were treating her, more like a human in this environment. She felt like she was being seen as she was literally shrinking. And that's how she ended up in my office, because she was wondering, why don't I have any energy? Why can't I sleep? Why am I thinking about food? Why am I dizzy? And, all I got to say is, it's because you're not eating enough food and you're exercising. And, she really had to hear, she could hear what I was saying, and then weighing it against like the improvements to her social standing that she saw. And we met a bunch of times and we had this conversation, but in the end, she was just like, maybe when I get out of this grad program, I can think about eating more, but that's just not something I'm willing to consider because of the realities of, being a Black woman in this white program, which was just devastating.
Yeah, that's so disheartening to hear. So, I mean, we think about it, and you do touch on it. We think about it like, this here. We think, maybe I need to straighten my hair, or, maybe I need to, dress a certain way. Like I've got, obviously these are like some things that represent Black, the colors of these beads or whatever. Maybe I need to dress a certain way or straighten my hair or, do things like that, but not thinking that, oh, well, maybe I need to, my body needs to look a certain way in order for me to fit in. Wow. I know there's another young lady who's an athlete, so of course that's a different type of thing. And I also thought of and of course it was on the tip of my tongue and it went away. Misty Copeland, how when she was a ballerina, how she, her body didn't look a certain way. So we know in certain spaces there's an expectation, but it never really dawned on me that that same thing would happen, just in a regular job.
Yeah,
you
right.
know.
Grad school, yeah, definitely jobs. How we're treated, how much space, literal, space we take up in a room can be quantified when we're already, too loud or, too visible. Yeah.
That's something. A lot. Well, you do talk a lot, obviously, because you are a dietitian, about diet culture
Mm.
and kind of where that stems from, and just talk a little bit about that because there's so much more that you talk about in the book, but we can't have this conversation without even talking about diet culture just a little.
Yeah. Um, Diet culture is often, spoken about just as a legacy of like Weight Watchers. People will look at Weight Watchers or, like Jenny Craig, and they'll be like, that is why, we have been on diets. They'll really point to like that moment as what we were, supposed to start dieting. But it's actually centuries ago when, excuse me, white Anglo-Saxons specifically, men were looking at African women, also trafficking them to, Britain and the US. And some Black women were, they described them very corpulent, so had a round buttocks was their like specific language. Basically, these women had curves, and Anglo-Saxon women did not. So all of a sudden, this is a Black woman's specific trait. And then from there in the 1800s, we really saw this depiction of Black women as fat and curvy and white women as thin. And the more distinction that you could, decipher or like gain, the thinner you are, the further away from Blackness, you really became. Like that was like the more origins, and then the things that were like diet solutions, we saw them in women's books, women's magazines, were just like solutions to get you further away from, being associated with Blackness. And so like that is just like more what has created this legacy. So when people, talk about it's just dieting or such, I'm like, it is, but it's because of, anti-Blackness and anti-fatness that has been here for hundreds of years.
And that's something, because I mean, the reality of it is, before we came on, I talked a little bit about myself. I have done Jenny Craig, I have done Weight Watchers,
Yeah.
I've done cleanses, I've done different things over the
Mhm.
years. A lot of people have, and I have gone up and down because a lot of times these things that we're doing aren't necessarily sustainable.
Right.
And just having an understanding of that if anything, if you're going to do something that, if maintaining a certain body, structure is important to you, there are ways to do it that don't necessarily involve, these heavy things of deprivation. And you do talk about that, a little restriction,
Yeah.
just highly restrictive diets and things like that.
Yeah. And how, that can also be the type of agency that we're seeking if we're like reducing and shrinking and having this like control of our body when historically that autonomy has been taken away from us. So like the literal shrinking of our bodies, which then makes us take up less space, and like so many just other things that align with like what we have been told about our bodies 100%. And yeah, thinking about it, it can be hard to separate, but like, why do we want to be, literally smaller? Like, why do we want to shrink ourselves? Like, why is weight that thing, that we're desiring or chasing? And, looking instead, like, what do we want? Granted, sometimes we do want and could get increased social capital, but again, at what cost? If we think about that student, and everything that she was having to go through, she just wasn't studying as well. And a lot of us are not present when we're so focused on food, just like what do we want versus like what do we want to get rid of?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I was telling you, because I believe in being forthright here. I was telling you before we came on, as I was reading your book and just thinking about my own self. It's like, really, for me at this stage of my life, it's more about fitness and being able to function, to do things and not feel like I'm, winded or, things like that. Or if I don't have kids or grandkids, but if I have my friends' kids or grandkids, if I want to chase them around, I don't want to be like, oh, Lord. You know what I mean?
I
So
do.
for me, it's not so much about, I want to be a size, whatever I was when I 30 years ago, but it's more or less just making sure that I have, a certain level of body function. But we talked about it as well, and we'll get into more about her in a little bit. But like Lizzo, obviously she's not a small person,
Right.
and she has a lot of, vitality and energy and things like that. So it's not always about size. It's about, the things that you're doing to have a level of, physical fitness. So I just think that's
Totally.
important.
Yeah,
But
and people, don't often separate the two things. And, it's hard for people to understand that a lot of thin people are not fit, like they do not exercise, right? Because we just
right.
associate the two, or like thin people must be healthy. Like that is also, another assumption that is like instantly made. And not just by society, but by our doctors, as
Mhm.
well. If we come in and look a certain way, they'll be like, diet and exercise without even, asking, what we eat, what we do for exercise. And they'll just like automatically mean you need to work on these. And so, yeah, it's society, it's us, it's just all out there for sure.
Right. And the things that we internalize.
Yeah.
And we kind of touched on this a little bit about Black women are seen to have this resilience, and you talk about Stacey
Mhm.
and that piece, but that is something as well, that these bodies are just supposed to be resilient, and we're supposed to do everything for everyone else.
That one's a hard one because there was this resurgence of and appreciation even of Black girl magic and all of the things that Black women do and can do. And I think it's a good thing to think about, like, just because we can, right? We can do so much. We can endure. We can do twice as much to earn to earn half as much. Yeah, and, like, where can we be gentle and where can we, know that even though we can, we don't have to sometimes. Stacey doesn't have to run for office. She
Right.
doesn't have to save this country, once again, even though, maybe she could. Yeah, where is that softness even though we can keep pushing ourselves? Yeah, it's hard.
Mhm. Mhm. And a big one, because we see it come up a lot, respectability. Yeah, how
It's
respectability
so
shows up in
hard.
our bodies, in our person, in our representation.
Yeah. Uh, a specific example is a good one of Monique, the comedian I use in the book, and I've seen her since always talking about, women who wear pajamas and bonnets in the airport specifically, right? And how we need to present ourselves. We collectively need to present ourselves. And how those of us who are queens, who know how to do these things, need to tap, our queens in training and let them know that they're doing these things wrong. And I have taken, so many photos, in airports or otherwise with skinny white girls wearing, Ugg boots, leggings, and like
That
this
part.
messy bun, right? That is just going like you have not, combed or brushed your hair in 5 days. And it's it's very clear, like the double standard that is there that exists, for all of us. And I also understand Monique. Like she thinks that she's caring,
Mm,
for us. She's trying to protect us from, the gaze of whiteness and the, like the policing of, physical and, mental policing of white people on, Black women. And I get that, but also I feel like there can be the transparency there. Like society, you can say like society is just mean and will judge you.
right.
Ways to get around that or can be conforming in these ways. But I understand if you don't want to, that it could be a different conversation rather than policing, Black women for what we're wearing, what color our hair is, whether or not it's straight. It's hard.
It is hard. It is hard because I will admit, because I'm 57, and I'll admit sometimes I see women that are obviously younger, maybe wearing some things. I'm like, ooh. But just like in a lot of other areas, their bodies, their choice. It's not necessarily, not necessarily for me to have, feel like I have to voice an opinion about that. And, we also understand that some of that stems from, think back to the civil rights movement where, people were dressed to the nines in their best of their best, but it didn't stop them from beating it. Oh, I almost cussed. Getting beaten. It didn't stop them from pulling hoses on them and dogs on them. There are Black doctors or lawyers or engineers, whatever, who live in certain neighborhoods and drive fancy cars and wear the most expensive bags and all of that, and they'll still get pulled over, they'll still get stopped. Looking or presenting a certain way is not the protection that people may want to think that it is.
That's the part, right? The assumption is, we'll be safer, but in the end, yes, you still get pulled over in that Mercedes because you shouldn't be driving it. But yeah, you're totally right.
Well, in the next section, because the book is broken down into different sections, that section was like live, laugh, love, which is basically we're told, just live, laugh, love, but it's not always necessarily as easy as it seems, especially in this body, in this nation. Mm-hmm. But the next one, you talk about some of the solutions that people have come up with. And one is, hearkening back to Lizzo, a thing of body positivity and what does it mean to show up and be positive about the body that you exist in.
All the time, right? The body positivity movement is gaining in popularity, and I think that in and of itself is a good thing. A lot of historians will also point back to that it was started actually by Black women as resistance to like the things that society has told us about our bodies. And with the body positivity, I always express my concerns over the individuality of body positivity, that it's on me, to think myself into positivity. Mm-hmm. That, also as much as I can think myself, into positivity and be, happy or kind to my body, like I still have to go to that workplace where they're still going to treat me in a certain way. Like I can do so many things that are on the individual level, but, that doesn't protect me as I go out into society. And then, yes, Lizzo is a great example of this. Like anybody who's followed Lizzo knows, she talks openly about the trolls that are, always talking to her about, how she must not be eating this way or she must be eating that way and how she needs to eat more salads and less, of whatever it is. And even though she is like working out on stage for hours, in ways that I never could, and most of us, I assume, right? She is an athlete. But yeah, people are just not able to let her live her life at all.
Mm-hmm. And that's so true. But you in the chapter you also talk about toxicity. So what is that? What is the duality of how we may express, how we feel about our bodies, or how others perceive that expression?
Oh, sorry, say that again.
Or the way that other people may perceive our perceptions of our own bodies.
Mm-hmm. The toxicity kind of goes into, that toxic positivity. Like we can, people who are just saying, telling us to just love our bodies, right? Oh, it's not really, it's all in your head. You just have to, love your body and things will be fine. A lot of like the body image curricula to make you feel better about your body, all assume that you have a very, thin white body, and really just everything you think about is in your head. It's actually not that bad, which is something that I've seen with my clients. A great, a regular intervention is just this idea where your body image or the ways that you feel about your body are only in your head. And so as soon as you, just think yourself into feeling better, everything is going to open up. You're, not going to have any body concerns anymore. You're going to go out into this world and be confident. And, for thin white women, that, is probably true. And for many other people, thinking ourselves, into positivity will, not provide the protection or, what is needed. So, yeah, complicated for sure.
It is. It is. And as you were saying that, one thing that made me think about though is a lot of times, from what I have heard,
Okay.
you can attest to it or not, that oftentimes that Black women do have a more positive body image.
That one is a great one to talk about community and the importance of community. So I've heard that let's see, there's like 5 facets of that one, but we'll stick with this one. I find that depending on the community, oftentimes that Black women are in, that can really provide a protective factor if people, together and, are able to say, forget that, like, we are incredibly confident. I, will point to Lizzo, even Megan Thee Stallion, who is still like typically pretty thin, but 10 years ago would have looked at you, we would have said she was chubby based on like the 2010s and the, bodies that were in fashion then. So the protective factors that can be found in that protest and just being, unapologetically loud and confident together. And, I will see a lot of research in my field that will talk about how Black women are confident and we really shouldn't be because, we're, say like we're more likely to be overweight. So we really shouldn't be. So I want us to live out loud and be unapologetic in our bodies. Yes. And be the protective factors in community that we have.
I love it. I love it. We have a comment.
Yeah.
We talk about the body, not just in terms of weight, but you talk about the body in many ways. The question just came up. It's just a little bit of delay. Any comments on the trend, RE, facial enhancements, fillers, etc.? Because that is a thing.
Because that is a thing. Yes, I have so many comments. I tend to collect a lot of the thoughts around Kim Kardashian and really the appropriation of Blackness among some white women in the mid like 2010s, 2010s. And how, since then, since the idea, of wide hips, a thin waist, and large chest became, popular along with like Black features. A lot of Black women have been chasing what white women who are appropriating Black women have. So, like the Kim Kardashians and other people are really trying to really appropriate like curves and, fill and a bunch of other enhancements trying to, appropriate that Blackness. But then a lot of Black women are seeing that and, BBLs, for example, are, body contouring. Yeah, that we're seeing Black women die in the process, dying to be, a certain type of body type. So yes, I have comments. I understand it. Again, it's one of those like you gain or can gain social capital by, having more, pretty privilege or desirability. And it's really sad and unfortunate that it exists.
Yeah, that is something just to think about, that the contortions that oftentimes, we may go through just to, or people may go through just to feel to look a certain way. Um, in the next part of the solutions, you talk about something called intuitive eating, which there is, I guess, a thing about that where people have been trying to say, oh, don't worry about this diet or that diet, or being vegan, or whatever, just eat intuitively. So tell us a little bit about that and your thoughts on what that even means.
Yeah, that one I became familiar with also from like my clinical experience as a like working with a lot of people with eating disorders. So as we already mentioned, like the Weight Watchers, the Jenny Craigs are really focused on this like restriction and counting model of how you should be eating food. Intuitive eating came around in like the 80s and 90s, and it was this idea where you just, eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full, which on the surface, I say sounds, great. But when we really like dig into what those authors and then the 10 principles come, which, are again, are kind of like rules for how to eat intuitively, it's like the only eat when you're hungry and never, never for pleasure, never because of the social situation. It's this very like finite window of when you get to eat. So it became like this other type of structure and like way to contain ourselves and, really our bodies in like a different way. So it was supposed to be indeed like this new agey, like very progressive situation. And for some people it is. For some people coming off Weight Watchers, the idea that you can just eat without counting, it's great. But then we look at, people whose lives aren't always set up where they can just like eat something when they're hungry. We have 8-hour work weeks. We have people who don't have enough money for food. It's supposed to be this only eat, what you really want or what you're really craving.
Right.
And like who has the time, money, resources to do, to eat what we're really craving, and even to know what that is when our bodies have been, you know restricted or, only given access to certain foods for a certain amount of time. So like things that always sound good on the surface, can work for people in privilege, but not always for everyone.
Right, and you just said a key word there, privilege. There's a part of the book where you talk about an event that you went to that was really centered around how people approach, all of these concepts from a point of privilege, to think that this is what health looks like, and this is what, eating well looks like, and the ways that so many other voices are left out of that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always think about that as like the quinoa and kale-ification of like health and
Right.
nutrition, like philosophies, and how, yes, privileged it is. It was at a conference in Napa, California. I'm trying to think of like a other equivalents of just basically a very remote area. It's wine country, so it takes like hours to get to. You have to pay thousands of dollars to go to this event. And then there, you're told that you should only eat whole grains, fruits and vegetables, healthy fats, and fish. Like that's the whole thing. And who has, the money to cook that way? Who likes, to eat that way, first of all? There were questions about white rice and how culturally congruent they are for so many cultures around the world. And they were like, you just shouldn't eat it. You need to eat like quinoa and brown rice instead. And it was just this so elitist version of like what healthy eating and what nutrition is supposed to be, so centered on basically, privileged diets, white folks diets, and disregarding like the, historical, the beautiful ways that people of color, indigenous people have really, found our food ways. And so yes, but it's not us who are making the policy. So really, how do we, get at those tables? How do we create and change those policies is something that I'm working on.
No, that's good. And that's why we need people like you, to be in those rooms, to create your own rooms as well,
Yeah.
and just to be able to have these conversations because, there are people and you mentioned it, I'm aware as well, because one of the things I like to do when I'm volunteering is volunteering to do things that help to feed people.
Oh,
But
yeah.
we're just thinking about the food deserts, which we know that there's some areas where there isn't a grocery store. All there is the little corner store or whatever that you can even get food from. But then you introduced a new concept to me, and that's food apartheid.
Yeah. So I was definitely one who used the language only that was food deserts, and then food apartheid was introduced to me from, some Black radical farmers, particularly Chef Fresh in Chicago, who explained that, the idea of a desert, first of all, a desert is beautiful. Like we look at the Mojave Desert, like there is so much natural occurring, you
Mm,
know, there. And in food apartheid, we don't discuss that it's intentional. It's really, not that there is just a natural absence of like trees, say. It's like there's redlining, there's an under resourced community. The lack of food access, lack of food and community that is there is really by design. So it's been what is, taken away. It's not a natural occurrence is the difference. So food apartheid is intentional.
mhm. As are many of the systems that keep us from really being able to thrive or to live well, as
Right.
this show is called. A lot of things, they are, systemic. So just being aware of it. So,
Yeah.
of course, we've kind of talked about some of the things that really are the things that we need to move beyond or, have a better understanding of. But I love that you end with what the new story should be,
Yeah.
how we can begin to change the narratives about what it means to exist in these bodies.
Mhm. One thing that I always hope people take away from my book is that, our bodies are not the problem. They're not a problem. They're not a project. We don't need to solve, anything about our bodies, first of all, right? That all of the narratives out there, we don't own any of them. They may, exist around us and we navigate them, but they are not ours to own. So being able to rewrite, yes, what it's like to, be us, to have our bodies, to be in community with others, and not, reinforce those respectability politics, having that respect, that transparency, and rethinking then that resilience and like what it means to be strong, and like being aware of who that's for and like who we're performing for, rather than just like head down and through. So really rewriting our body narratives is something that I really would love us to do, and really center like joy and pleasure and passion and all of those.
And as you were saying that, what was popping up in my mind is, well, unfortunately, there is a little bit of privilege in this, but when I see like Black women, Black people coming together and, they're just having a good time and they're dancing or, they are on a trip and you see like 40 Black women of different shapes and sizes in their swimsuits and they're just, all of that. And as I say, I realize it's a certain level of privilege to even be able to do things like that. But just seeing it at
Mhm.
all is beautiful. Or I'm thinking of Janelle Monáe earlier this year, her what is it, the pleasure something, I'm gonna get it wrong, but
Mhm.
the Age of Pleasure, I think is the name of the album. But some people didn't like it because maybe she was showing a little bit more than what we're used to seeing from her. But at the same time, it's her body.
Mhm.
It's always been hers. And, however she chooses to show up in said body, that's her right to do that. But there is a level of freedom in that to say, F your your standards. I'm going
Exactly.
to show up in this body. And if I want to show my tatas, I'm going to show my tatas. If I want to
Mhm.
wear a thong bikini or whatever it is, I'm going to do it because I have the freedom to do that in this body.
Mhm. And it is not only that freedom, it's protest, right? Because of everything we've already talked about. Like me just existing and experiencing pleasure and joy in and of itself is a political act and protest. Yes, I love that. Everything you just said, that was great.
Absolutely. And Jean is saying that she hopes food apartheid becomes the preferred term. Yes, yes, because it definitely is something that we know is intentional. There's a
Yeah.
reason why there's liquor stores and, certain things that we see in our community, that there's a reason why.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So, but I do have to ask the question because I'm sure there may be some, not not necessarily my audience, but someone who might not normally be a part of the audience may run across this and ask the question or wonder, like, so okay, if we're saying it's always been ours, and we eat what eat how you want, whatever, is there ever a reason or that we should actively really be trying to change our body composition?
Sometimes I would say I don't get that question as much as I thought I would. I thought that every interview would say, like, well, if you're just saying that I need to be eating or could be eating whatever I want, doesn't that mean I'd eat fried chicken, 24/7? And I understand where that comes from, and I understand like what, that exists in. I'm not necessarily a like listen to your body type of person, but my guess is that if you ate fried chicken for 3 meals a day, every day of the week, it would not go well for a variety
Right.
of a variety of reasons, especially as we get older, right? Things become more important to include in our diet. But I always like wonder where that message is from. Like if we are even talking about, quote, Southern diets, they had so much variety in there, right? People will definitely like chalk it up to like fried chicken and biscuits or like whatever it is. But if we really look back, it's collard greens, it's red beans and rice, it's all of these things. So like the messages of like people wanting to rebel, like I get that, you're like, well, if you're just saying this, then I'm going to do that. And I understand like people's strong reaction to me
Right.
saying, like, maybe you do know what you want to be eating, or maybe, there is a part of you that is looking for that freedom. So, like, how do you explore it without just being like, well, I'm just going to eat whatever it is? But yeah, how do you explore that as you rewrite things, as you, reclaim and know that it's always been yours? Like, what does that look like for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just important because I know what you mean, but there's
I
always
get
somebody
it.
like, oh, so
I
she's
get it.
just saying we can eat like chitlins and hog maws.
And I'm not saying
We
you
just
can't, right? That's
all
the
the
part
time.
too. Yeah.
Right. Right. And it's something I can't think of the young lady's name, but there is a dietitian I see on social media. She always talks about decolonizing the diet.
Yes. Love
Yes.
her. Yeah.
Just to talk about that, we don't have to think that, oh, it has to be like you were saying, oh, quinoa and kale and, brown rice and, you know, small
Yeah.
plates all the time, with portion sizes this big,
Yeah.
that there
Mhm.
there is space. There is space to be able to have both, or
Yeah.
like one of the young ladies that you mentioned that was like Black and Mexican. You can have your tacos. It's okay.
Right. It's
you know,
fine.
you know.
Yeah, that one is I've gotten many times, like, aren't isn't my, fill in the blank cultural food unhealthy? I had someone, who loved Persian rice, whose mom made it, like, that was the only thing she knew how to cook when she came to school, but she got to school, heard that it was quinoa or nothing, and was so overwhelmed by this, she just didn't eat dinner. Like, that was it. It was
Mm,
either, "I know how to cook this thing tastes good, quinoa is terrible, I don't wanna eat it. I don't know what to do otherwise." She just stopped eating food. She didn't have an
mm,
eating disorder, she was just overwhelmed and, like, really caught in, like, this cultural binary of foods.
mhm. So if there's one thing that you want people to take away from It's Always Been Ours, well,
Mhm.
before I ask that question, the young lady who's on the cover. Tell us a little bit about her.
I will. That is my friend Shayna, and actually, she starts off the last chapter. Yes,
Uh-huh.
which is about Black joy. Um, yeah, I always mention it. I'm so glad you asked about it. So my original cover concept had a image that was an open source image, which my publisher had not known. So we put together this beautiful cover, but the image had already been used, so it wasn't
Mm,
going to be unique to my cover.
right.
Um, thank you.
Mhm.
And I had gone down, yes, to get my headshots taken for my author page and for my website. And I dragged Shayna with me because that's a scary thing. Big cities can be scary. LA is a lot. So we ended up doing a photo shoot together. And, by the time we were back and kind of scrambling, I said, there is someone who brings so much joy, who has the best laugh and one of the best smiles. Um, what do you think? And, they said yes. Shayna thankfully said yes. And she's
Mhm.
also featured throughout the book. And so that story is in with the Black Joy chapter because that is something that I would love for people to take away and explore. It's just that joy, the pleasure, the softness, and if we can find it and where we can find it.
Mhm. And I love that picture because she looks like so many people that I know.
Yay! I'll tell her that. I love
Yeah.
it.
It's like I see people that I know in Shayna, so that's what I love about that
Oh,
because she has, I mean, she looks like that Black woman that you would see at your church or in your family or whatever the case may be. She looks like that. So when just the whole collective that has always been ours, it's nice to see someone who looks like us.
yeah. And Shayna has the loudest laugh of anyone I know. Anytime we're out in public, like she is the party, let me tell you. But yeah, Black women laughing loudly in public is something that brings me a lot of joy.
Absolutely. And I don't know why something in my house is going off. I don't know why. Maybe it heard me talking. I'm like, why am I hearing voices in the other room and I'm in here by myself? So that's kind of weird.
Getting near Halloween,
Getting my Halloween started a little bit early.
yes.
But yes, so you kind of wrapped it up in that question. The other question I was going to ask just about what you want people to take away from the book, from your work. So
Yeah.
that's that. So just to find that joy in who we are and it continue to exist in that. And then, when we run across these systems and things like that aren't
Right.
working in our favor, to do all that we can to, raise
Finding,
against the
yeah,
machine.
finding resilience in community rather than, within our bodies and feeling that we, need to be the ones to do all the work when we can find and lean on. Yeah, the joy and love and community for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. I know, you're out in California, so it's still relatively early. It's starting to get late where I am, and you've got a very busy schedule ahead. So, thank you so much
Oh,
for
you're so
being here
welcome. This was
and
great.
sharing your book. And, I encourage people to go and grab copies. And I'm going to do something that I'm sometimes bad about doing, but and that is letting people know that you can go to the Brown Girl Collective bookstore, which is tied to Bookshop. So if you go there, you will be able to find Jessica's book as well as books by some of the other people that have been guests in this space, either in the past or upcoming. So please go and grab a copy, read it, and have these conversations amongst the people that you love. It's just important. It's an important conversation, and we need to keep it going. So. All right. So everyone, if you could just hold on for me for 1 second, Jessica, and I will gonna bid everybody else good night. So just don't hang up yet, but hold on for me for 1 second. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this wonderful conversation with Jessica Wilson. She is a force, and it's such a blessing to have someone like her out there in the medical field as a dietitian who is speaking truth to power and making sure that our stories are heard and that hopefully through the work that she's doing that of her and others in that same in her same space can really begin to make change, and that we're getting all of the things that we need. So I look forward to seeing you again next week. I will announce who next week's guest will be here very soon. But in the meantime, have a wonderful rest of the week. And as always, please continue to live well. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.